Welcome to Lesson 8 of Week 9. Having covered the mechanics of budgeting, cost sharing, and various financial requirements, we now turn to presenting your budget persuasively. The budget justification, also called the budget narrative, explains your numbers to reviewers. Your budget itself shows what you plan to spend. The budget justification explains why each expenditure is necessary, how you calculated amounts, and how resources connect to project activities. A strong justification builds reviewer confidence that you understand your project and can manage resources responsibly. This lesson will help you understand the purpose and audience for budget justifications, how to structure effective justifications by category, what level of detail to provide, and common mistakes that undermine justification effectiveness. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to write budget justifications that explain your resource needs clearly and build confidence in your project management capabilities. The budget justification is your opportunity to demonstrate that you have thought carefully about implementation and that your budget reflects realistic, well-planned resource allocation. Understanding the purpose of budget justification helps you write more effectively. The justification serves multiple important functions. Explaining the why shows reviewers why each cost is necessary for project success. The budget says you need a project coordinator. The justification explains what the coordinator will do and why that role is essential. The budget includes travel. The justification explains what trips will accomplish and why they cannot be replaced by virtual alternatives. Demonstrating reasonableness proves that amounts are appropriate and not inflated. Reviewers want assurance that you calculated costs carefully rather than padding your budget. Specific rates, methodology, and comparisons to standard costs all help demonstrate that your numbers reflect real expected expenditures. Connecting to activities links expenditures to specific project activities described in your narrative. A budget item that cannot be connected to any described activity raises questions. The justification shows how each cost supports particular work you will perform. Building confidence convinces reviewers you can manage resources effectively. A well-written justification demonstrates careful planning and understanding of your project. Reviewers who trust your budget planning are more likely to trust your overall project management. Proper structure makes your budget justification easy to follow and demonstrates organized thinking. Several structural principles guide effective justifications. Follow budget categories by organizing your justification the same way your budget is organized. If your budget has sections for personnel, fringe, travel, equipment, supplies, contractual, and other, your justification should follow that same order. Reviewers can easily move between budget and justification when they match. Cover every line item by explaining each budgeted cost. A budget line without justification raises questions. Even if an item seems self-explanatory, provide at least a brief explanation. Reviewers should not have to guess why any item is included. Use consistent format by applying similar structure to similar items. If you explain one staff position with role description, effort level, salary basis, and annual cost, explain all staff positions the same way. Consistency makes the justification easier to read and demonstrates systematic thinking. Match funder requirements because some funders specify particular formats for budget justifications. They may require certain information for each category, limit justification length, or provide templates. Review the funding announcement carefully for any justification requirements and follow them precisely. Personnel typically represents the largest budget category and requires thorough justification. Strong personnel justification addresses several elements for each position. Role description explains what each person will do on the project. A job title alone is insufficient. Describe the specific responsibilities. The project director will oversee all project activities, lead the research team, and manage collaborations with partner sites. Connect the role to project needs. Effort justification explains why this level of effort is needed. Why is the project coordinator at 50% rather than 25% or full-time? The justification should convey that you determined effort based on actual workload rather than arbitrary allocation. Reference specific activities that require this level of commitment. Salary basis explains how you determine the salary or rate. For existing staff, reference their actual salary and institutional pay scales. For positions to be hired, explain how you determine the rate, perhaps by referencing comparable positions or market surveys. Reviewers want to know rates are reasonable, not invented. Calculation shows the math transparently. If the project coordinator earns $60,000 annually and will devote 50% effort for 12 months, show that calculation. 60,000 times 0.5 times 1 year equals $30,000. Transparent math builds confidence. Fringe benefits justification explains the rates applied to personnel costs. Though often brief, this section should clearly establish the basis for fringe calculations. Rate identification states the fringe benefit rate applied to salaries. If your institution uses a 32% fringe rate for full-time employees, state that clearly. Different staff categories may have different rates that should be distinguished. Rate source references the basis for the fringe rate. Ideally, you have a federally negotiated fringe benefit rate, and your justification references that agreement. If not, explain how your rate was determined and what benefits it includes. Reviewers want assurance the rate is legitimate and appropriate. Category differences exist when different rates apply to different staff types. Full-time employees may have higher fringe than part-time staff. Graduate students may have different rates than regular employees. If your budget includes multiple fringe rates, explain which applies to whom and why. Calculation shows fringe as a percentage of salary. For the project coordinator example, if salary is $30,000 and fringe rate is 32%, fringe cost is $9,600. Simple multiplication that reviewers can verify builds confidence in your budget accuracy. Travel justification must explain why trips are necessary and how costs were estimated. Reviewers scrutinize travel carefully, so thorough justification is essential. Trip purpose explains why each trip is necessary for project objectives. Conference attendance to present findings, site visits to partner locations, training sessions requiring in-person participation. Each trip should have clear project-related purpose. Trips without obvious connection to project activities invite questions. Destination rationale explains why you are traveling to specific locations. If you are attending a particular conference, identify it by name and explain its relevance. If visiting partner sites, explain what will be accomplished on site that could not happen remotely. Specific named destinations are more credible than vague travel references. Cost basis explains how you estimated transportation, lodging, and per diem. Reference current airfare estimates, GSA per diem rates, or institutional travel policies. Showing that you researched actual costs rather than guessing demonstrates careful planning. Include assumptions about trip duration. Alternatives considered addresses why virtual participation is not sufficient where applicable. In the current environment, reviewers may question whether in-person travel is truly necessary. If there are good reasons why physical presence is required, explain them. Acknowledging you considered alternatives strengthens your case for travel that is truly needed. Equipment justification must explain why purchases are necessary and appropriate. Since equipment represents significant one-time expenditures, reviewers examine these requests carefully. Necessity explains why the equipment is needed for project objectives. What activities require this equipment? What functions will it serve? Equipment should be essential for project success, not merely nice to have. Connect the equipment to specific project needs described in your narrative. Specifications explain the features and capabilities that led you to request this particular equipment. Why does the project need this level of capability? If you need a high-performance computer, explain what computations require that power. Specifications should match project requirements, not exceed them unnecessarily. Cost basis shows how you determine the price. Reference vendor quotes, catalog prices, or recent purchases of similar items. Equipment costs should be specific and verifiable, not round number guesses. If you obtained quotes, mention that you did so. Availability addresses why existing equipment is insufficient. Reviewers may wonder whether your institution already has similar equipment you could use. Explain why available equipment does not meet project needs, whether due to capacity limitations, technical specifications, or availability constraints. Supplies justification explains consumable materials needed for project activities. While individual supply items may be small, The category as a whole deserves clear explanation. Categories group similar supplies together logically. Office supplies, laboratory consumables, participant materials, software subscriptions. These categories help organize your justification. Rather than listing every individual item, group related items and explain each category's purpose. Connection to activities link supplies to specific project work. Laboratory supplies support the data collection activities described in AIM 2. Participant incentives will be provided to research subjects during recruitment. Office supplies support the project administrative functions. Each supply category should connect to described activities. Cost estimation explains the basis for supply cost estimates. Reference experience from prior projects, vendor pricing, or calculated amounts based on usage rates. If you expect to conduct 100 interviews at $5 of supplies each, show that calculation. Demonstrate that estimates are grounded in actual projections. Reasonableness requires that supply amounts match project scale and duration. A 3-year project with extensive participant contact appropriately has more supply costs than a 1-year desk study. Amounts that seem disproportionate to project scope invite questions. Contractual justification explains consultant services and contractor relationships. These costs often involve significant amounts and warrant careful explanation. Nature of relationship describes what services each contractor provides. An external evaluator will conduct formative and summative evaluation. A statistical consultant will provide data analysis support. A curriculum developer will create training materials. Clearly describe the scope of services each contractor will provide. Selection rationale explains why this contractor or type of contractor. If you have identified a specific contractor, explain their qualifications. If you will select through competitive process, describe the expertise you will seek. Reviewers want to understand why external expertise is needed and how you will obtain appropriate services. Cost basis shows how the contracted amount was determined. Reference standard consulting rates, prior experience with similar services, or quotes obtained during proposal development. Contracted amounts should be justifiable, not arbitrary. If rates seem high, explain what makes the expertise particularly valuable. Deliverables specify what the contractor will produce. Evaluation reports, training curriculum, data analysis files, technical specifications define the concrete outputs expected from the contractual relationship. Deliverables help reviewers understand what you will receive for the contracted amount. Subaward justification explains the role and budget of each subrecipient. When significant project work will be performed by partners, reviewers need to understand these relationships. Partner role explains what each subrecipient contributes to the project. The university partner will lead data collection at the Southern Region sites. The community organization will deliver intervention services to program participants. Describe the substantive work partners will perform, not just that they will participate. Necessity of partnership explains why this partner is essential rather than optional. What unique capabilities, resources, or access does the partner provide? Why would the project be weakened without them? Strong justification shows that partnership serves project goals, not convenience. Budget summary provides overview of major cost categories in the subaward. While detailed subaward budgets may appear elsewhere, the justification should summarize key elements. The partner budget includes a 0.3 FTE investigator, a full-time project coordinator, supplies, and travel for site visits. Give reviewers a sense of how subaward funds will be used. Cost reasonableness confirms subrecipient costs are proportionate to their role. If a partner receives 40% of total budget, their described activities should justify that share. Subaward amounts that seem disproportionate to partner contributions raise questions. Indirect costs justification explains how you calculated facilities and administrative costs. Though often formulaic, this section establishes that your indirect rate is legitimate. Rate identification states your indirect cost rate clearly. The university's federally negotiated indirect cost rate is 54% of modified total direct costs. State the rate precisely and identify what type of rate it is, since institutions may have different rates for different types of activities. Rate basis references your negotiated rate agreement. Cite your rate agreement by date and cognizant agency. If your rate was negotiated with the Department of Health and Human Services, say so. This reference establishes that your rate is officially approved rather than self-determined. MTDC base explains what costs are included in the calculation base and what is excluded. Equipment over $5,000, participant support costs, and sub-award amounts over $25,000 are typically excluded from MTDC. Explaining your base shows you understand how to calculate indirect costs correctly. Calculation shows how you arrived at your indirect amount. List total direct costs, identify exclusions, calculate MTDC base, then apply your rate. Transparent calculation demonstrates accuracy and allows reviewers to verify your math. Common justification mistakes undermine budget credibility. Recognizing these errors helps you avoid them. Too brief justifications provide insufficient detail to understand cost necessity. Travel, conference attendance, $10,000 tells reviewers almost nothing. How many trips, where, what conferences, what will be presented. Brief entries invite skepticism and suggest inadequate planning. No connection means costs are not linked to project activities described in the narrative. If your justification mentions activities not described elsewhere, reviewers wonder if your proposal is internally consistent. Every budget item should connect to something in your project description. Vague amounts present round numbers without calculation basis. Supplies, $20,000 per year sounds like a guess rather than an estimate. How did you arrive at that number? What supplies specifically? What usage rate? Unexplained round numbers suggest you have not actually planned your resource needs. Missing items occur when budget lines have no corresponding justification text. Every line item in your budget should be explained somewhere in your justification. A cost that appears in the budget but is not mentioned in the narrative raises questions about whether it is necessary or was simply copied from a prior proposal. The budget justification is more than a list of expenses. It is a narrative that tells the story of your project through resources. Understanding this narrative dimension helps you write more effectively. Tell the story by connecting budget to your project implementation story. The justification should help reviewers envision how you will carry out the work. Personnel descriptions bring the project team to life. Travel explanations show how you will connect with sites and present findings. The budget becomes real when explained as part of your overall project story. Show planning by demonstrating you have thought through implementation carefully. Detailed justifications signal that you understand what it takes to execute your project. Vague or superficial justifications suggest you have not really planned how work will happen. Your justification reflects your project planning quality. Build credibility by using specific details that show expertise. Reference specific conferences in your field. Identify equipment by model and specifications. Name particular evaluation frameworks you will use. Specific details demonstrate you understand your domain and are not guessing about implementation. Match tone so justification reads as part of your overall proposal, not a separate document. If your narrative is formal, your justification should be formal. If your narrative is accessible and clear, your justification should match. Consistent voice throughout the proposal creates professional impression. Following best practices produces budget justifications that strengthen your proposal. These practices should guide your approach to justification writing. Be specific by providing concrete details rather than vague categories. Name the conferences you will attend. Identify the equipment specifications you need. Describe exactly what each staff member will do. Specificity demonstrates planning and builds reviewer confidence. Show your math by making calculations transparent and verifiable. If you claim a position costs $32,000, show that this is a $64,000 salary at 50% effort. If you project supply costs of $6,000, show that this is 100 participants times $60 per participant. Verifiable math prevents questions about accuracy. Connect everything by linking each cost to specific project activities. Every expenditure should have clear purpose. If you cannot explain how a cost supports your project objectives, reconsider whether it belongs in your budget. Unexplained costs invite scrutiny and suggest weak planning. Follow format by matching funder requirements and using consistent structure. Some funders specify formats, follow them exactly. Even without specific requirements, organize your justification clearly and treat similar items similarly. Professional presentation reflects positively on your overall proposal. Let us summarize the key points from this lesson on writing budget justifications. The budget justification explains why costs are necessary and appropriate. Your budget shows the numbers. Your justification tells the story behind them. A strong justification demonstrates careful planning, connects resources to activities, and builds reviewer confidence in your ability to manage the project. Specificity matters because concrete details build reviewer confidence. Vague statements invite skepticism, specific information demonstrates expertise, name conferences, describe equipment specifications, explain calculation methods. Details show you have actually planned implementation rather than guessing at resource needs. Connection to activities is required for every budgeted cost. Each expense should link to something in your project description. Costs that appear disconnected from project activities raise questions. Use your justification to show how resources enable the work you have proposed to accomplish. In our next lesson, we examine mapping budgets to required application forms. Most federal grants require specific budget forms like the SF 424A. Understanding how to correctly complete these forms and ensuring consistency between forms and detailed budgets is essential for compliant submissions. Practice exercise. Select a budget category from a current or planned proposal. Write a justification paragraph that explains the necessity, calculation basis, and project connection for each item in that category. Review it for specificity and completeness.